Now remember, of course, the court proceedings began this morning with this report being handed over. It is a report of Oscar Pistorius' mental evaluation, and I just want to remind you of what came out of that report. First of all, there were two reports, really, a psychiatric report and a psychological report, which had something in common. Their findings were the same. They both agreed Pistorius did not suffer from a mental defect at the time of the alleged offence, and he did have the ability to distinguish between right and wrong. Shortly after that, we saw Dr Gerald Versfeld take the stand. He is the orthopedic surgeon who's been treating Pistorius since he was a child. He is the gentleman who carried out the bilateral amputations which Pistorius underwent. Now, earlier in court, there was a demonstration which the media was ordered neither to photograph nor film, but Oscar Pistorius had to sit down. He had to remove his prostheses, and the judge went in for a closer look at the tissue and mobility. That was what the orthopedic surgeon was trying to show her, that there's a great deal of pain resulting from certain difficulties Pistorius is having at this time, that he's also very unstable on his feet. He often overbalances, he often falls over, and there are certain surfaces on which he's unable to stand properly, even if they're slightly uneven. So that demonstration took place a little earlier. Then when examination of this witness began, we went on to hear from Dr Versfeld that Pistorius can walk for short distances without holding on. His stumps, though, place him in a slightly dangerous situation because his ability to flee is impaired, according to the doctor. So his ability to ward off danger without a weapon. Now, that will become quite important later on as this case continues to unfold. He also went on to say there was a strong chance that Pistorius could fall. He then went on to describe the cricket bat, and we know that one of the issues in contention is the swinging of this bat, whether Pistorius was indeed on his stumps when he swung it or whether he was wearing his prostheses. And the doctor goes on to say if he's holding something with two hands, it would impair Pistorius's balance because he cannot use his hands to balance in that sort of position. Versfeld says if he swung a cricket bat with force, chances are he would tipple over on his stumps. The issue of light and dark came up, and here defence lawyer Barry Rue asking why Pistorius would battle in the dark and manage better in the light. Versfeld says an able-bodied person would use part of the anatomy in the leg to assist with balance, which gives that person cues as to which way he's standing or facing. Pistorius, though, determines through his sight rather than the use of his legs, which way he's facing. So without a visual reference, he struggles to orientate himself in the dark. Now, he goes on to describe a bruise. Rue refers to this bruise that Versfeld observed on Oscar Pistorius' body, and the doctor says this cohered with what Pistorius described as the result of having a fall. Next is, of course, Nell, who then begins to cross-examine Versfeld on the stand. And he asks Versfeld whether he has any knowledge, any intimate knowledge of the case, whether he has been following media coverage of the Pistorius trial, or indeed whether he has been exposed to Pistorius's version of events. And Versfeld denies having been exposed to any of this. He says he's picked up bits and pieces here and there, but he hasn't actually been exposed to either the version of Pistorius's events or the details of the trial. Nell then asks about the timing. He points out that Versfeld was approached by the defense after Oscar Pistorius' testimony on the stand to help with his defense. So this was after the fact. Nell says Versfeld tried to contribute to the defense's argument by showing Pistorius' vulnerability and difficulty in moving, and Versfeld does not disagree with this comment. But Nell then moves on to ask whether Versfeld is in a position to comment as an orthopedic surgeon on whether Oscar Pistorius, on how Oscar Pistorius would have or should have responded to danger. And then he moves on to the possibility of fleeing. He says, would Pistorius have been able to flee from a situation like this? In other words, would he have been able to run away from the situation if he were on his stumps? Well, he responds, it would not be possible for him to run as you or I run. He battles to walk. For him to turn around is quite a process. He says he's observed Pistorius turning around, doing a 180-degree turn, and he has to use 7 movements to turn around. around. He has to put the stump down in a very specific way, for starters. And Nell then points out that despite all the movement back and forth that Pistorius describes in his version of events on the morning of the 14th of February, that Oscar Pistorius never fell. The firing of the gun then comes into question. Versfeld says Pistorius would have had severe difficulty in firing 4 shots at the door because the recoil of the gun could have knocked him off his stumps. Nell asks if the recoil wouldn't have thrown Pistorius off balance if he was standing against a supporting wall. And Versfeld agrees that a wall would have lent him some support. Now, in the search for Reeva Steenkamp, which we know followed afterwards, we know that there was a great deal of movement with Oscar Pistorius. We know he was moving back and forth from the bathroom to the bedroom, and he asks Versfeld if all of this could have been done on his stumps. Versfeld says yes, this could have been done on his stumps, and Nell asks if he could have moved the fan from the door to the bed 3 meters. But he says the fan wasn't necessarily carried. It could have been a walking or balancing aid. If he felt himself falling over, he could use it as a means to balance, to prevent himself from falling on the floor. And then Nell goes on to ask, he walked from the bathroom tiles over the carpet onto the balcony on his stumps. Would that be possible? Versfeld again says this would be possible. Now the issue of light and dark comes into play. Nell asks whether all of this movement could have taken place in the dark, and Versfeld says it depends on the light intensity. But he goes on to admit it would have been difficult for him to see if he did not have a visual reference in the dark and if he did not have anything to balance on. It would be difficult for him to be running around in the dark with a gun in his hand.
Know more. eNCA.com